Hello, everybody. Go grab your telescopes. Look for your favorite constellations. It's nighttime. Today, in the Generalist podcast about gaming, but also everything else, brought to you by Nightmare Games. Go donate to our Kickstarter. It has like 20 hours left, and we're only I think we're slightly under $6,000 away. So I think we're real close on that one. Go donate to that if you haven't already. What's new in Nightmare Games? Last week, we did Ludum Dare.
We did do Ludum Dare.
Yep.
But real quick, it's been a month since the last Call for Alcohol Kickstarter.
Yeah.
That's, man, time flies. Anyway, Ludum Dare, Quarter Life Crisis. This is what we did. Let me post this link for people in chat right now.
Nice. And for any of you watching from Futuresville, or sorry, nobody watching.
Yeah.
For anyone in the future not viewing this live on Twitch, that portion where he links you the link is going to get real confusing.
Yeah. So what you can do is go to, it's going to be nightmaregames.itch.io, and you'll be able to play Quarter Life Crisis and all of our other Game Jam games there. And then you can visit nightmare.games to see our full website. We have all of our games on there. We have Last Call for Alcohol and everything else you should be interested in.
Yeah. Or nothing.
Or nothing. Yeah.
And with us, we have a special guest, right?
We do. Today we have Jitspoe. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Awesome. Okay. So
Nailed it.
Jitspoe is currently an indie game developer. He's a former AAA programmer. What did you do?
Yeah, I was a gameplay programmer. I worked at Red Storm, which is part of Ubisoft. Worked on some titles like Far Cry 3, Far Cry 4, Ghost Recon Future Soldier. Couple things that didn't quite make it that I can't talk about. And then went over to Boss Key Productions, which was the studio that Cliff Bleszinski started up, and worked on Lawbreakers and Radical Heights over there.
Awesome.
Oh, wow. Radical Heights. That's the one on the list. Like, of course, that was a pretty awesome pedigree that you just named off, but Radical Heights was kind of the one that piqued my interest the most. Did you enjoy, like, how could you compare your experience to your work in the AAA area with what you're doing now, indie?
It's extremely different. Like, when you're in the AAA studio area, there's so many people, at least on the projects I was working on. Like, Montreal is a gigantic studio. I wasn't in the Montreal studio, but we were like a satellite studio helping out Montreal, working on a massive project. So like it's not even really comparable. I mean, I'm still doing gameplay programming, right? I'm doing all kinds of stuff as an indie developer. I'm a solo developer, so I'm doing the programming, I'm doing the animation, I'm doing the music, I'm doing the sound effects, I'm doing so many different things.
Yep.
And then when you're on a project of the scale of like Far Cry, there's just so many people on it that you're like a subset of a subset of a subset working on a project, which is great if you just like, want to be part of a team and get a title out there. But if you want to have a lot of creative control, it's very limiting because, like I say, there's so many layers. Like, you've got the head studio that's kind of directing things, and then that gets passed down to, you've got a designer that goes through a producer there, that goes through a producer at your studio, that then goes through a designer, that then goes to you, or something like that, where it's just like so many layers of separation between what I program and what the game design is.
Yeah.
And also you've got, especially if you're working with a franchise, you're kind of like limited as to what you can do creatively without getting too far away from the formula they've established.
Would you say that's the reason that you became an indie developer now? Because you just wanted complete creative freedom?
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a big difference between working for Ubisoft and working at Boss Key Productions. Boss Key Productions is probably kind of like the dream size studio. You've got enough people to cover everything, but you don't have so many people that you don't recognize everybody's face, and you don't have any creative input whatsoever. It's also the most difficult size studio to maintain, I would think, because if you've got like 40 to 60 people, it means you've got too many people to make a game that doesn't sell really well, but you don't have enough people to make these huge AAA blockbuster size games that everybody's going to buy. Like, people are only going to buy so many games, and when you're competing with all of these really big titles, it's difficult to just build anything of that scale when you don't have that many people.
Yeah, I mean, from our experience, you only need one dedicated person and then a bunch of paid resources to make a good game, right?
Yeah, that's it. One dedicated person, and then a couple idea guys, and that's all you need to be successful in the indie space.
Technically, you can make a game with that. Yes.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, we've made games.
Yes, we've made games. Have we made good ones? No, but
I don't know. Plumbo.
Plumbo, of course.
No, funny story about Plumbo. I was sharing our website with some friends, and they all loved Plumbo. Like my friend Jake was like, "Yeah, what was that game where you could teleport? That one was sick."
Yeah. So a little bit of backstory on Plumbo for Jitspoe. It was our first, actually, I think my second game jam game ever. And this was while I was working on my first commercial product, Spark, which wasn't very good either. But I ended up at the end of it, I remember thinking that it was the worst game I've ever made in my life. Like, it was just the worst thing. And right after I got done with it, I really didn't care, like, if anyone played it. I didn't, like, promote it to get ratings or anything like that. I come back a few weeks later, and probably not. I think I got notifications that there were a ton of comments on it. I was like, wow, what's happening here? And it had just, like, blown up. Tons of people were playing it. And it did pretty good in the jam, but over the course of it's been probably 2 years. It's been my most consistently played and downloaded game, like more consistent than anything I've ever tried to promote or put out there, or like show at like a conference or anything like that. Plumbo always overshadows everything, so it's like death walking behind me, just like always nagging in my ear. It's
funny how
great,
that works.
but awful. Yeah, it's like I hate it. I absolutely hate it. But everyone else seems to enjoy it, and so I'm glad that, that's the cool thing about doing creative things is even if you don't like it, a lot of other people may or they may not. It really doesn't matter. You just got to put it out there. Cool stuff. Speaking of game jams, though, we had a big game jam, and I think that's how you discovered Jitspoe, was because the Ludum Dare website was promoting him.
Yeah, so I'm just looking through Ludum Dare, checking out the metrics, seeing how our game's doing. But Jitspoe, the fantastic game developer that he is, his stream pops up, and funny because Jitspoe, what was your role in Ludum Dare?
I looked at the webpage.
Okay. What did you vote for any themes? Did you sign up at all?
Oh, you're right. I actually did vote for some themes.
Okay, there you go. So that's a pretty big role.
Okay.
And I feel kind of bad because like I actually voted. One of my votes was for the theme that got selected, and I didn't really want to do that theme, but I just kind of wanted to see what other people would do with that theme, and then it ended up winning, and I was like, I don't actually feel like doing this, so I didn't. And now I almost feel guilty about that.
You did
brought
this
upon us.
Yeah.
I know. It was just like one vote away from something really awesome, and then mine would just seal the deal.
Yeah. You can blame us all.
So a recap on that. The theme was your life is currency. And so a lot of people took that saying like their actual health bar is their currency, and you can, we had ideas for buying like weapon upgrades with your health. But then, you're lower on health and you're like more susceptible to dying. But instead, we took that to a very literal standpoint where you are a quarter, you are a currency. Nice. And you are placed into an arcade machine. But the further into this arcade machine you go, the more you realize that they're not quite what they seem, and they are pretty terrifying from the perspective of quarter.
Yeah.
Lots of dead quarters.
Yeah, you can imagine that like there's a little path, a little bridge or a road that you have to take as a quarter to get safely with the rest of the quarters in the coin bin, but sometimes it just doesn't pan out for them, and so we tried to explore that route, and I thought it was a clever idea, but I'm already seeing people who don't get that at all. They were like, what is the connection to the theme here? I'm like,
you're a quarter.
It's pretty obvious. Like, just but that's okay. But there, I mean, you touched on it. The obvious thing to do with this theme would be to make some sort of currency system with your health bar, and then make it to where you're playing a game that any of your upgrades or weapons that you purchase or anything that you need to kind of play the game, you have to sacrifice a little bit of life to do that. And I've seen many games that went down that theme. And I think that's probably why we shied away from that, because it's very common, very, very easy to identify like your connection with the theme. But we went down the route where apparently we didn't connect with the theme. That's how good we did.
Apparently, you living the life of currency is different from your life being currency.
That's right. Yeah.
I like that you changed it up a little, though. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we tried to.
Yeah, I like to try to do so. Yeah, exactly. I'm looking at our document. So
have you looked at it all Jitspoe?
Your game? No.
Yeah, Quarter Life Crisis. So look at the Twitch chat real quick. I'm posting another link to it. You can tell just by the front. The art style is very like bubbly, and it seems very friendly. But then you look at the arcade cabinet part of it, and there's blood on it.
Nice.
Yeah, the mood shift we did well. I think, like from the arcade into the machine. I think that went well.
I had posted an image of the main menu on here, but it didn't pop up. Wait, this is the main menu, but it doesn't have our character on it. Anyway, our character was a little quarter. It just said 25 cents on it, and she had a little bow, and she's very sweet and innocent looking. But the deeper that you went in, she's just like what the fuck? This is terrifying.
Yeah, she started getting like bruises and scrapes, and there were like, I don't know, spiders and random other carcasses and stuff like actually inside the arcade machine as you progress deeper into the game.
So you had a few bugs in your game? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we did. We definitely did. Really good ones.
Try the HTML version.
Oh God, there is no HTML version. Something about Game Maker Studio 2 and their physics system didn't agree with HTML5, so we didn't get.
Oh really?
Yeah, we didn't get a web export for this one, which sucks because I like to put the Game Jam games on like our nightmare.games website. But for this one, I think we just have to deal with Windows.
Ugh, disgusting. We should play games on Mac.
Oof. Disgusting as well.
Just kidding. Speaking of game engines, though, Jitspoe uses Godot for the game that you're making, right?
I do.
And we were dabbling in Godot for a while. We're trying to figure out where we want to go after GMS2, whether we want to go to Unity, which has a ton of like community resources and assets and lots of cool learning tutorials and whatnot, or Godot, which seems cool because it's free and like open source
and awesome.
Yeah. And awesome, but it just seems like there aren't as many resources and it's not as polished. What's your experience like working with Godot?
I mean, that's definitely true. Unity's been around longer. Well, yeah, I'm pretty sure Unity's been around longer. I mean, Godot didn't really come out into the public eye much until recently. Like, it's really been building up recently. There was a 1.0 version, I assume, and a 2.0 version that I think were only 2D. And then Godot 3 came out and added 3D support. That's what I've been using. I've been making a platformer that controls like a 2D, but is actually using 3D assets. But from what I've heard, the 2D aspect of it is actually really solid. I haven't done any 2D games with it. Everything I've done has been 3D.
And they even have VR support now, I believe.
I know people have been working on some VR related stuff. I don't have any VR equipment, so I haven't dabbled in that at all.
VRTK had like Steam or Valve has released a SDK for Godot that apparently like doesn't take too long to get integrated, but isn't exactly seamless.
Okay, I see.
So it works, but isn't ideal yet. But then again, Unity, it didn't work very well with Unity at the beginning, and then developers like started building plugins and all these assets and stuff to make it more tightly integrated. So all you need is the population, and that's very true with open source software in general. But that's another cool thing about Godot is if there's something in the editor that you want, or something that they don't have, or some sort of integration that you think would be good, you can submit a pull request. Like you can literally put your code into Godot and make it better for everyone else. And I absolutely love the community aspect of software engineering and open source software in general. And I think like blending that with our passion for game development and an engine where people are always improving it is kind of the big front runner on why I would want to use Godot. But then again, ease of use is a great thing, and like having all these tutorials out there and all these amazing assets and just being able to stamp together something awesome is pretty valuable as well.
Yeah, I think Godot is actually, you mentioned not having the tutorials and stuff, and there are some tutorials. It obviously doesn't have as big of a user base as Unity, so there's less stuff out there. But I was able to pick it up and watch just a couple videos and get a feel for it. One of the reasons I picked Godot is that I wanted something that was a little bit smaller. Like I knew I wanted to make a pretty small scale platformer game, and I didn't want to have a whole lot of engine bloat with it.
Yep.
Like I wanted something that was fairly minimal, that because I knew like what I wanted to do as far as the character movement and stuff. I just wanted to write all that from scratch, so I didn't want to have to deal with like some really big bloated character controller class that has all kinds of crazy functionality that I'm going to spend hours trying to wrangle around to make it do what I want it to do, versus just writing it from scratch. Like I've done enough character movement stuff that I know how to write it from scratch. And Godot actually has some pretty nice functions, for just like move and collide, move and slide. And you can write something from scratch fairly quickly, and it's not that big of a deal. At least that's what I found. So it doesn't have as many things in there as Unity or Unreal, but in the same way, it's kind of freeing because you don't have so much stuff that you have to dig through to figure out what to do. Like it was like a perfect size engine for me because it had just enough to do what I wanted to do and not a whole lot extra. Like I could go through and they've got like documentation built right into the editor. You can look up like, the Vector 3 class and see what functions it has. And then it's just a small handful of things. And it's like, okay, I've got some dot products, cross products. I can do what I need with that. And I don't have a whole lot of extra stuff that theoretically makes things easier if you know they exist, but it's just a whole lot of junk to dig through. So it was kind of nice in that regard. Okay.
And I know with GMS2, there are a lot of very, very frustrating traits. Like, I don't know, it crashes all the time. Source control is terrible.
We were talking about like source control being a problem in any engine. It's just the way of you have so many different assets, like image assets and things, and like Git specifically, what we're using was developed for code, and I think that it does a absolutely fantastic job being a source control for code. But when you add in these different, like there's these massive JSON files for the editor in GameMaker Studio 2, and it keeps track of your views in there. Like you can have different tabs of windows to work on objects in different places. Maybe you have like a sprite editor up over here, and it keeps all of that data in massive JSON files, like interconnected JSON files. And so if a programmer or somebody is working on something over here and they have a different view up than what I have on my computer, and then you commit and try to merge your code, then it's gonna see that there's been a change in your view JSON, and you want to ignore that. But if you ignore that file, then there becomes the disconnection. It can corrupt things. So it's like you can't ignore
we have
what
no
you
experience
want to.
Of corruption.
Yeah, no experience, especially not during Ludum Dare. Like,
it definitely didn't set us back an hour and a half.
Yeah, so it was awful. I think that I think that you run into that issue with any editor. I know in my brief stints with Unity, they have a built-in source control, but it was pretty weak. And I know of people who have used Git with Unity and run into the same issues that we have in GameMaker Studio 2. And so I'm just going to assume that Godot would have those issues. You haven't, since you're working solo, you haven't worked with.
Yeah, I'm
Git?
working solo, so I don't like. It doesn't really matter what source control I use. Like I just check stuff in, and that's pretty much it. It's basically just a backup for me.
Nobody's merging or doing anything like that.
I have heard people say that Godot is actually pretty decent for source control because the way it's set up. So everything in Godot uses what they call like scene trees. And you can break chunks of the tree out into separate scenes, so you can have different people working on different like subsets of a scene.
Yep.
And then if I'm working on, I don't know if you break it into like the sound layer or the graphics layer or whatever, you can have one person working like that one subset of the tree, and then they're not stomping on somebody else working on some completely different thing in the same level. And the scene files are just text. They're kind of like almost like a config file. So they just have the whatever the object ID is and some coordinates and stuff. So I think it's fairly I won't say completely painless, but reasonable to merge. And if you happen to be working in the same scene, like two people happen to be working in the same scene at the same time, you can reasonably merge those changes and not completely stomp on each other's work.
Yeah, but
like I say, I have not personally dealt with that, but that's just what I've heard. So I've definitely heard people complaining about source control in Unity. So that sounds like it holds true.
Yeah,
but
okay. People will just complain in general about anything.
Yeah.
You use even the best tool for the longest time, and you'll have some complaints.
Things have their quirks. Fortunately, there haven't been any major complaints that I've had with Godot. There's a couple little things that actually might have gotten fixed with. I just updated the latest version, so I don't know if it fixed the one complaint. The major complaint I had with the old one is that when you imported something and then you changed it, it would re-import it like once or twice, and then it would just stop updating the view in the editor. So like if you were trying to, modify a mesh or something and align it with something, then it would be a problem. Anytime you run the game, it would update, but in the editor, it just didn't. You had to like close and restart the editor if you needed to look at the new version. But I think that might actually be fixed in 3.1.1. But it's hard to say. I know they fixed a lot of 3D related stuff, and that was something with a 3D importer.
Well, hopefully that's fixed. It's always risky updating to the latest version when you're in the middle of a project, right?
Yeah, I'd been hesitant for quite some time, but like Lilybite is another big Godot user and kept bugging me. Like, why are you not using the latest version? Even though it's beta, it's still way better. And I waited until it was actually unstable before I finally updated. So there's that. I'm very hesitant to update engines because when we were working in Unreal Engine and working on Lawbreakers, like it was a nightmare to update that because we made so many engine level changes and stuff, and then it'd be like 3 weeks worth of work just to get everything back up and running and functional again after an engine update, because they'd change like core stuff, or we'd change core stuff, and then they'd shift it around, and animation systems would change and particle systems would change and all kinds of like core level stuff would change. They'd be doing optimizations in one way and we'd be doing an optimization in another way, and then all of that stuff conflicted, or stuff would just get broken. They'd update something and there'd be new bugs. And we'd fix those bugs.
So when you were working with those AAA studios, were you assigned to like one specific aspect of the game? Were you working on multiple things, or what could you give us some more details of like exactly your day-to-day lifestyle?
Yeah, like I was saying, the teams are very large, so you tend to be focused in one specific area. Like I'd be focused for example, on weapons for quite a while. So I'd just be working with the way weapons behave, and then maybe after we got all that straightened out, maybe I'd work on like a game mode system for a while, something like that.
Mhm.
It was the thing that was most frustrating about it is that like there's so many people on the project, and if you say like statistically one person during the entire course of the project commits one change that breaks the game, then effectively you would be broken like every day of the entire project. And that's like a pipe dream case of, you know, every person only breaks in one breaking change. Realistically, that happens a little more frequently than that. So you'd get in the state of, okay, I've got a version of the game that doesn't crash or things work the way I expect it to. I'm going to stick with this as long as possible and work on my thing for as long as I can. And then it's like, oh crap, I need to commit. Well, shoot, that means I have to sync and run and make sure everything works together with my changes. And then that could be, you know, hours, days dealing with all of the fallout from everybody else's changes. And then you finally get all that stuff straightened out. And then you have to like resync again because someone else changed a file that you were working on. So it felt very counterproductive. Like I felt like I was working at about like 10% of my actual capacity between syncing stuff and dealing with things broken and dealing with compile times and stuff like that. So it was very refreshing to when we went over to Boss Key. We had a much smaller team, and we were always keeping the game in a runnable state because we would do play tests like at least once, sometimes 2, 3, even 4 times a day. So we would like have a play test in the morning and get some feedback and change some stuff, and then do another play test in the afternoon. And like it was, it almost boggles my mind that Lawbreakers wasn't a runaway success, because it was so different working on that project from any other project in the past that I'd been on. You know, normally these big projects are everything is broken. How are we ever going to ship this game? I can't even run it and test my stuff. And then like a few weeks before launch, it's like, okay, everything works. Boy, it would be great if we could have like balanced things better or made these changes, but it's playable now. And then you ship it. But like Lawbreakers was like every day we were playing it and having so much fun and, you know, making changes, making balance tweaks, adding crazy new things. And then there just, I guess, was not an audience for that fast-paced shooter.
Are you looking up Lawbreakers?
Yes, I just...
Yeah, me too.
Yep. Initial release date, August 8th, 2017. Looks like PC and PlayStation 4.
Yep.
Okay.
I've never heard of it. So
I've heard of it. I heard of it when it came out, but from your perspective, I mean, I'm sure you had a pretty limited viewpoint, but I mean, is there a key to getting around that inefficiency as you scale up?
That's a tough one. I mean, it's trade-offs, right? Like sometimes you can institute policies that are like, you know, you have to check your stuff and make sure it works, and you have to test this, and this before you submit your code to make sure you don't break these other systems. But now you're spending more time testing your code with all these systems and not working on your next task. So there's time. It's one of these things where, you know, you're sacrificing your time to hopefully save other people time, because if you don't test these things, you could break someone else's system. It was a big deal when we were working on multiplayer, and then we had a single player team, you know, checking in stuff all the time that would break multiplayer. So it felt like 90% of the project I was fixing stuff that was multiplayer related, that, you know, some single player team checked in that didn't test in online mode to see if it broke anything. So, and there were a lot of systems that were just implemented in a way that just didn't work very well for multiplayer. So it was a constant struggle.
A lot of like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. There's just so many people that it's really difficult to manage that. I mean, that's where producers and stuff are really important, but there's only like so much you can do. Just after a certain point, you hit a point of diminishing returns where there's just so many people on the project that you can't keep up with everything and make sure everything's working together easily without spending a lot of extra time.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-boggling to think, like, the Call of Duty franchise. How many? I mean, I no, I'm not for sure, but how many people work on like one of those projects? They release a new game every year. It's like, what, 1,000 people?
Yeah, I'm not sure how many people are on that studio. But
Do you know
well, actually,
what,
studios.
like,
they
I was going to say
alternate.
because they alternate. One of them's
Yeah, they
Sledgehammer,
alternate.
and the other one's like Treyarch, right?
There we go.
Right.
It takes 500 people to make a Call of Duty game. About is what it says.
Okay.
And so, like, in a studio of 500 people, that's I can only imagine how hectic it can be. There has to be such a like refined hierarchy there.
Yeah, and that's part of the thing that it kind of drove me away from it, because there's like you're just churning to get this thing done, but you don't, like, as an individual, have a lot of creative control. You may have some awesome idea, like if you're working on a Call of Duty franchise and you're like, man, it would be amazing if we did this, but there's already so much stuff in the pipeline. Things are already getting cut because they're out of scope, and your idea is not going to go really anywhere unless you happen to be like a creative director or like working closely with the creatives and in the head of the project or something like that. So it can be kind of frustrating, because it's like I make games because I'm a creative person, and if I just wanted to sit down and churn out code, then I could work in some other, like, banking or something else like that, where I would get paid a heck of a lot more money and not have to work nearly as hard. But I don't think I could ever do that. I mean, I'd do AAA stuff again before I started working in banks, because it's just
you really don't like
it's
breaks.
hard to
your
imagine.
game's name's Lawbreakers. You hate banks. I mean,
yeah, banks was just an example of just
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of software that goes on in banks.
Yeah. Watch out for this guy.
And it's just
so I have a question for you. You talk about not having creative control in some of these bigger projects, and Lawbreakers, although wasn't the biggest project you've ever worked on and was a slightly smaller scale, you probably didn't have a lot of control. Is there anything after the fact that you look at Lawbreakers and like think to yourself, if I had control, I would have done this, and maybe it would have been a little bit more successful?
It's
a good question.
I mean, I did have a lot more creative control in Lawbreakers, actually.
Did you?
I mean, it was a much smaller studio, and we were constantly, as engineers, we had a lot more design influence, because we were prototyping the different classes and abilities and stuff like that. So I would work on something and prototype, like a grapple swing or something like that, and eventually it might make it into the game, or I had some crazy idea for a character that basically had jet boot type things, or laser boots, where you'd fly. Basically, instead of flying forward, you would fly up, but then you could, like, tilt your camera down and then fly forward, kind of like Iron Man style.
Yeah.
And that role actually ended up making it into the game. So there was a lot of
That's
fun
why they
stuff
shut
like
it down last year.
There wasn't enough Iron Man hype at the time. You guys were too late.
But I'm hoping I'm wrong on this, but the thing I think it was what really killed Lawbreakers is just the fact that fast-paced arena-style shooter genre is not very appealing to people anymore. It's the kind of shooter that I love. So, like, if I was in full creative control, I would probably it would probably be different, but it would still probably be a game that wasn't successful. It's actually kind of my long-term plan is hopefully I can make a few smaller indie games, build up to the point where I can make my dream arena shooter game that I can afford to just have fail, but I can make my dream game, even though it's not going to sell hardly any copies, because nobody seems to want to play those games anymore.
What's your favorite game, like arena shooter, I'm assuming, from, like, what's your most influential game?
Probably Quake 2.
Yep. I was thinking Quake. I was thinking one of the Quakes. So you say arena shooter, and like that's just
I
what
grew
comes
up
to mind.
more in the Quakes than the Unreals. I played the Unreal games, but I was more of a Quake guy. I don't know, just something about the movement and everything just felt more solid to me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I grew up modding Quake and Quake 2, and Lawbreakers was kind of like at that time, when I finally got into the industry professionally, the arena shooter was petering off. And then when Cliff started up his studio, he was kind of expecting, because trends kind of come and go, and about every 10 years or so, something that was old all of a sudden picks back up again. So he was kind of banking on the arena shooter making a big comeback. And it's kind of ironic that, like, there's two, I think, key elements to the arena shooter. One is weapon pickups, and the other is the fast-paced movement in kind of a very confined arena area where you're just fighting to the death all the time. And at that time, Lawbreakers came out, but there was also PUBG, which I'm sure you guys have heard of.
What's that?
Yeah. Which in Lawbreakers, we went the route of going back to the arena style, like fast movement and tight combat. And PUBG kind of took the opposite approach. They went back to the weapon pickups in the world, but very slow-paced movement, and that's the one that took off. So it's almost like, of the two directions we could have gone, we picked the wrong one.
Yeah, I think like it could have been a timing thing too, because of how popular
the timing
Overwatch
definitely hurt
is,
us. Yes,
and it like class. I definitely think that class-based shooters are coming back right now, and may be the thing for the next few years, until, obviously, like, Battle Royale is the thing, but I think people are enjoying class-based games. League of Legends is ridiculously popular. Overwatch is popular. Apex Legends, all of these games are the games, and they're class-based. So it sucks how RNG life can be sometimes, right? Where if you maybe release Lawbreakers today, or maybe even in 3 or 4 years, when people are sick of only being able of getting shot and dying once, and then having to reload the game completely before you can get in and have more combat, I think that it's gonna rubber band back into these really quick, tight gameplay loops that you're talking about, where it's really fast. I pick up a weapon, I get into combat, I kill somebody, I die, doesn't matter, because 7 to 8 seconds later I'm getting back into the action. And I think it's going to start rubber banding back, because these battle royales are expanding the amount of time it takes for players to get into the action, and they really enjoy that. But at some point, gamers are going to get used to it, and they're going to yearn for what's next. And what's next, I think, is going to be the rebound back to these quicker, tighter gameplay loops.
I hope so, because I enjoy those games a lot more than the battle royale style games.
Yeah, and we've seen lots of different types of battle royales. So have either of you guys played Apex Legends much?
Played a little bit, yeah.
A little bit. I know that there's, like, it's the first battle royale that I've seen to have a respawn mechanic.
Yeah.
And that, like, for me, I hate battle royales because, I invest 20 minutes of my time playing PUBG, hiding from people, and I get loaded out with a car and 8x scope, and then, just shot in the back.
Right.
And that's pretty infuriating. But, yeah, things like respawns brings players right back into the game, depending on whether or not their teammates are good.
I mean, Apex is the latest and greatest for a reason. I think they're innovating well into the genre. They're doing a lot of good things. But there's still that, like, not an issue, but the trend, or the difference
it'll come back around
between the arena shooters and what's popular now is people really are enjoying the like open space you have, the amount of breathing room you have before the engagements, and being able to pick and choose your engagements. Because in the arena shooters, you didn't, like, I mean, really, really good players could try to pick and choose their engagements, their favorable engagements, but pretty much all the time it's twitch shooting. It's really tight controls and mechanics
Yeah.
are what's going to net you the kills. But more recently, the game design that is popular has been the slow, methodical, and strategic type games, and I think a lot of that is off the back of like the popularity of MOBAs and the popularity of like fighting games recently. There's a lot of team based and yeah, it's a lot of suspense. It's a lot of reward for doing the one thing, you know, like
exactly.
There's a lot of pressure on you to perform once.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, I think greater reward value for winning a game of PUBG versus something like Unreal or something.
Yeah. I mean, most certainly, and it kind of goes with the technology too, because back in the arena shooter days, you weren't going to connect 100 people to a game. Like you're not gonna you couldn't probably with the servers available and like the amount of data that would need to be processed. I don't think technology was there, and so now that we have the technology available and we're expanding and doing those things and like experimenting with what we can do. It's going to be really interesting to see where else it goes, because we've started expanding. Like there were the 20 on 20s and or 50 on 50s in Battlefield, and people were like, wow, online, way too many people all in one thing. And then I think from that they were like, oh well, wouldn't it be cool to have a free-for-all with 100 people in it? And then it just kind of goes from there. So along with like trends of game design, also the technology is what's dictating that a lot of the times.
Yeah, I'm actually curious what the maximum size deathmatch game in Quake 2 was, because technically I think the limitation was like 255 players, and they did have some like 64 player sized maps that they put out, but I don't know what the actual record is. Like at some point you're probably going to start running into issues either with the hardware like you were suggesting or something else, but I know from the code perspective there is like a 1 byte index for the character, so you could have up to like 255 or 256 characters in the game. Whether or not that would actually pan out, I don't know.
So PlanetSide 2 actually holds the record for most concurrent players in like one game. Back in January of 2015, they hosted 1,158 players in one massive battle.
Nice.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Except I'd be the first to die.
But you can respawn in that game, so it's nice.
Oh, sweet.
I played a lot of PlanetSide 2 back in the day. I still have lots of feelings for that game. I was running with the clan for a while.
Rip.
Yeah.
F in the chat for Claps' PlanetSide 2 days, please.
Sorry, it brought me back. But anyway, if anybody in the chat has any questions to ask in here, feel free to drop them in the chat. And if you like, you can even come join us here in the live nighttime room,
nighttime lobby, and we'll pull you in. While we're waiting on that, I actually have, I feel like, another pretty decent question. But you talked about how you modded at the beginning, and I assume that was probably your one of your first introductions to coding and probably game design and engineering in general. Do you think that people trying to get into developing games and maybe land a job at a AAA company or something like that, who are trying to get involved, do you think that modding is a really good step for that?
I do think modding is a really good step. That was when, let's see. Yeah, I started modding in Quake 1 like back when I was in high school and just messing around, like making some models, and then started getting into some of the code. I'd done a little bit of code before. I was like in QBasic, just doing simple, silly things. But yeah, it's nice if you've got an established game and you can go in and change, just start tweaking some numbers and some stuff and see what happens. Like I would go into Quake and then I would just like tweak some damage numbers and be like, oh wow, the rocket launcher does like 4 times as much damage. This is fun. And just start having fun with it. I think one of the first mods I did was the poultry launcher. I replaced the grenades with a chicken model, and the bounce sound, instead of doing like a tink tink tink, it would do a and then when it exploded, it would just go and feathers would go flying. So it's a fun way to just kind of like get in there, and you don't have to build the whole game. You can just get in there and start tweaking some stuff and see how another game was built and get ideas from that and figure out like, oh, if I were to build my own thing, here's kind of how I would structure it based on what I've learned from looking at and modding this game.
Mm. Are you guys familiar with Renegade X at all? Or the Command and Conquer Renegade game?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So
vaguely familiar.
yeah, I mean, you said you were just modifying some numbers, but I was holding a Renegade X a couple years back, and we just changed the gravity all the way down to like, I don't know, it was like 10% of what it should be, and so people were just soaring across the map, flying in the air, shooting at shit. It was pretty glorious. Just two teams jumped across the map in the air, and they'd collide. It was like something out of Ender's Game.
Nice.
That sounds really
pretty
fun. I just think that modding is the best way. Like, I think, especially in your time, without all of these awesome engines being like free and open source, and YouTube having so much information where you can literally learn whatever you want ever in like 10 hours on a computer, which is great. You didn't have that luxury, but I think that modding is such a fantastic way to get your feet wet, and it's all for the reasons that you mentioned, with just being able to understand a small subset of the entire thing and see how changing that impacts it. And that's like how you get involved in maybe web development. Like, you're like, oh, how do I change the title? And you see the title, you make a change to it, and then you see your new title there, and you're like, wow, that's really cool. Like, you don't understand any of the rest of the web page, but you know that like modifying this changes the title. And it's the same thing with modding. Modifying this small thing, just these damage numbers or these speed numbers or the gravity numbers, makes a huge difference. And like you say, it just like being absorbed in the code and being able to just process it, even if it's subconscious, just reading through it as you're trying to understand what you're doing is going to build a lot of foundational knowledge for if you want to do something in the future.
Yeah, and the cool thing about Quake is, I started out modding it, and in Quake 2, we had a mod called Paintball 2 that was a mod of Quake 2, and then eventually id Software released the source code for Quake 2 under the GPL. So we took the open source code, and then I made like a complete standalone game out of it. You can actually go to digitalpaint.org and download a completely free game. You don't have to have Quake installed, and you can just play it. So that was really cool, because then I could go in and enhance the engine where it was limited and add support for like higher resolution textures and full 24-bit textures and stuff like that, where it was all kind of piloted and designed for kind of software and first gen hardware. And now I can go and kind of enhance it and make it better for more modern hardware and make it just look better and stuff in general. I mean, it still looks pretty dated, but the mod was originally in 1998, but it's still fun to play. It definitely looks better than it did back then.
It's over 20 years ago, so I think
it is.
I think that's
20 years.
Okay for it to look
the
dated.
The game is older than many of the people that play it. It's kind of interesting.
Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions. Before we start to wrap things up, I do have one more question for you, Mr. Jitspoe.
Mm-hmm.
Is it pronounced Godot or is it pronounced Godot?
Or is it pronounced Godot? Or is it pronounced Godot? Or
yeah, I've heard mostly Godot at like conventions and things, so that's where I keep it. And somebody gave me a long spiel on why it's Godot. But I also heard a spiel on why it's Godot, and it was kind of convincing. So
both of them,
yeah, both of them were very convincing.
I feel like I haven't actually like verified this, but I've heard rumors that the developers themselves aren't taking a firm stance on how it's actually pronounced, and they're just kind of letting people run with it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there is an official pronunciation, but I think it was inspired by the play Waiting for Godot. So however you pronounce that, I think the English version
that's an entirely different argument.
Yeah. I think the English is pronounced Godot and French is Gato or something like that. So Yeah,
that's cat in
it's
Spanish
something.
too. So.
Yeah, well,
Gato.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, well, it's definitely pronounced yif.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Okay. I don't know about that.
.yif.
Hiff. Hiff.
Oh, I thought you were talking about other kinds of cats. Never mind.
Other yes. That's funny. All right. Well, Jitspoe, it's been absolutely fantastic having you here. I want to give you a little bit of time to like do your spiel. Like where can people who listen to this get more information about like you, what
Tell
game
us your
you're
website.
working on, and like any of your links
Your
and stuff
stream.
that you'd like to shout out?
Yeah, so I'm Jitspoe pretty much everywhere. It's Jitspoe. So I've got like a Twitter account. I technically have a webpage that I haven't updated in about 10 or 20 years. But the project I'm working on is called Fist of the Forgotten. It's a platformer that is, like I said, it was 3D assets. So I guess the term for it now is 2.5D. Back in my day, 2.5D was like Doom and Wolfenstein, where it was like 2D sprites and kind of a 3D world. But now I guess that's been repurposed. But yeah, you can go to twitter.com/Jitspoe or twitch.com/Jitspoe. I'm doing live streams starting at 7 p.m. every weeknight working on the project. I do have a website up for Fist of the Forgotten. It is, as you might guess, fistoftheforgotten.com. It's kind of a first pass site in there. I still need to get some like videos and stuff up on there. Game is still very much a work in progress, so I haven't quite gotten things into a point where I'm like, okay, this is really good enough to show. But the background images in the website are actually screenshots of the game, so it's got kind of that.
I love
fog.
this style.
Yeah, it's a lot of people compare it to Limbo. Yeah.
Yep.
But the gameplay itself is much faster paced than Limbo. I'm taking a lot of the things that I've played and done in first person shooters and kind of bringing them into the platformer. They may or may not be in other platformer games. I think some have things like ramp jumping and crouch sliding and stuff like that. So I've got a bunch of mechanics in there to make the game like really fluid and flow well and be very momentum based, so you can like slide down a hill and jump and get a bunch of momentum and keep that going as you jump around through the levels. So it should be really fun when the speedrunners get their hands on it and start going absolutely bonkers. I'm trying to design the levels so that they can kind of be played at two tiers. So you can play it as, the casual level where I just kind of slowly move through and I make my way through the level. And then there's like the people that want to go super fast and play at breakneck speeds, and they can just fly through the levels and have a lot of fun that way, hopefully. So that's
hours
kind of my design philosophy.
How many hours a week do you say you commit to this project?
I'm trying to do kind of like normal work hours. I'm trying not to kill myself and do like the indie lifestyle where I'm working, 20 hours a day on it, just barely sleeping. No, I'm streaming probably about 6 hours a day, and then I do a little bit of offline work as well. So trying to kind of keep the normal like work life hours on there, so I'm not completely killing myself. We'll see as time goes on, and
awesome.
the amount of money in my bank account starts dwindling down, and I have to get the game out there. But yeah, I'm hopefully planning to get it done within maybe a couple years. We'll see if that can actually happen or not. But if it's still like needs a lot of development after a couple years, I may look at getting some additional funding or something like that.
There we go. Well,
awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that. What do you got? Claps? Anything else before we do the sign off?
Another just big shout out to Jitspoe. He's been a great guest speaker on here. Learned a lot of interesting things, especially about the AAA community and how those offices are very sometimes inefficient.
Yeah, not me. I know that. Being in the software
and-
industry, it's
and-
the same thing.
just dealing with the 2 people we have here and our inefficiency, we might need some work if we
Yeah,
ever decide to scale up.
50% of us are terrible at what we do. So that's the fun part. No, I have a ton of a bunch more questions too for later on. So maybe we'll coordinate with you later on down the line when you have more to show, Jitspoe, and
Sure.
you can come back on and talk more about the game, because I have lots of questions about the game that I'm sure you probably answer on your stream on a daily basis. So I should check that out. And probably will, but hopefully in the future we can meet up again, and hope that the game does really well for you. If you guys are watching this live and haven't followed twitch.tv/Ekiyakov, I encourage you to do that if you're watching it in the future. Or are listening to it or something like that, and you want to watch it live, follow twitch.tv/Ekiyakov to get the notification of when we're going live. We do it once a week. Hopefully have awesome guests like Jitspoe on here more often, so you don't just have to listen to me and Cloud's terrible voices.
We're running out of things to talk about.
Over and over. I will never run out of things to talk about. I hate my
Running
voice,
out of
but I
relevant
love
things.
talking. Yeah. Check out our Twitter @PlayNightmare and our website, of course, nightmare.games. We love having you guys here. Thank you so much for joining us, Jitspoe, and we will catch you guys next time.
Bye.
Peace.